And every week, the shir is sponsored by Rabbi Michael and Jerry Laxmeter for the fruit of their granddaughter, Avigail Sarah Bat Shena Aharona. By the way, if anybody, is feeling inadequate and they want to match them or up them a little bit, they're from Vegas. They will appreciate this. You could. Competition is on. You could put your all on. Okay. And additionally to the Refuah Shlema, wish a Mazel Tov. They had 2 great grandsons in the last couple of weeks, but she said 3 babies. So you're including my grandson, who was named this week, even though his name is Shachar Yisrael, meaning it's a new dawn, it's a new day, and I'm feeling. Okay. That was he spoke, my son-in-law, after spending over 300 days in Gaza and doing quite combat type things. So they actually had the bris down south in the place that his Golani unit used to come in and organize right after when they would come out. So that's where they had the bris. Anyway, Shachar Yisrael. So, speaking of new dawns and new days, I'm going to say a couple things here. I think by the time I finish today, you're all going to say, "Yeah, I knew that." Yeah, I knew that. That was all pretty obvious. Like you didn't really add that much over here, did you? But we'll see. We'll see how obvious things are. Beshalach parot ha'am v'lo nacham Elokim derech eretz plishtim ki karovu ki amar Elokim peinachem ha'am barotam milchama v'shov Mitzrayim v'yasev Elokim et ha'am. I'll just get to the next one as well. Pokod yivkod Elokim. So I just want to pause over there. So we had 1, 2. In the first verse, twice it says Elokim. In Pasuk Yitches it says it again, and then in Pasuk Yitet it says it again. So, and this you wouldn't have said afterwards. Yeah, I knew that. I mean, actually, you didn't know this. When was the last time the name Elokim was used? For that matter, what name had been used throughout the Exodus? So now you'd have to go back and look because you don't know the answer. And it's interesting because it really had been about that you will know God, and the name God over there has generally been throughout the Exodus story. I know in the very beginning there is one about Vatirana, that the women who feared God, but for most of the story where God being involved in history, it's actually quite the opposite. That's what we see from the beginning of Va'era. Now God is going to be manifest, and Shem Hashem lo nadati lahem, and so on. That's the Shem which is used throughout the story. So therefore, every one of you, as soon as I read the first pasuk, you should have said, hold it, what's going on over here? Why do we have this absolutely, I'll edit an editorial comment, dramatic shift? And what happened? And it's not just one little turn of phrase. It was 1, 2, 3, 4 different times the name Elokim was used over here, and that obviously is something which should alert us. So it's Dafka Elokim. Let's read this all over again. Generally, what are we going to say? That Elokim is Midat Adin. So it's Dafka Midat Adin, which is coming. Vayihi b'shalach parot ha'am v'lo nacham Elokim derech eretz plishtim. So now we can start thinking, okay, so what is the involvement of Elokim Midat Adin? And of course, there's 2 possibilities. One possibility is that it's towards the Egyptians, and the other possibility that it's towards the Jews, and the other is that no, it's Midat Adin, which is the overriding Midah at this particular point. But of course, last week we called the Shir Judgment Day, and there was no Midat Hadin in the whole thing. It was all about a manifestation of Yud Kei Vav Kei. So at least I hope that there is some kind of intrigue that you now note that is taking place over here. Is that there's a problem over here. So it's really interesting. Does that mean that Midat Harachamim would have said, yeah, guys, go up the coast, it's quicker that way, and it was Midat Adin which is saying no? So we're just saying, think about that. Those who wonder, so this is like one of the really interesting things, because there's 3 interpretations of Rashi, and for some reason people always jump on the implausible mathematical one, that only 20% left and 80% died, and then 20% is some 600,000, that's only men between the ages of 20 and 60, which means, but that's just 20% of the population. And I hope you realize that this really is somewhat implausible, but what's more interesting is, why do people skip the other two interpretations of Rashi? I mean, one of them, I understand why they skipped them, because it's militaristic, and that is chamushim, they were armed. They were armed. Why were they armed? Because they think there's a war coming up over here. Why? Because the Egyptians may be chasing them. But that itself is interesting, because their being armed is going to be with arms which are not all that sophisticated, and if Egypt comes, they're going to be coming with their extremely sophisticated weaponry. So, okay, so that's just like part of the background over here, and God takes them this other way around. V'yikach Moshe atzmot Yosef, and again, Kipo Kod Yifkod Elokim. So I'm just going to say it again. The theological texture of this entire section is one over here of Elokim, Midat Adin, and there is this kind of really interesting issue, because the Egyptians are going to be chasing after them now, as we'll see very soon. Just a couple more things I want to point out. Pasuk Kaf. The Yisumi Sukkot, and they traveled from Sukkot. So, yeah, I can't help it. I mean, once this Sukkot over here, we just got to Pesach. Why are we going directly to Sukkot, and why are we skipping over here Shavuot? And I'm actually far more serious about that question than you think I am. Okay, the Sukkot is interesting. Also, some of you would note that when Yaakov leaves Lavan, and we've done that a couple of times, comparing the Yaakov Lavan with Am Yisrael leaving Egypt, especially based on the Vilna Gaon's commentary to the Zohar, where he says everything is interconnected. So there Yaakov also almost right away gets to a place which is called Sukkot. So there's something interesting here. And then Pasuk Kaf Aleph is where you have your other dramatic shift. V'Hashem holech lefneihem yomam b'amud anan limchotam haderech v'layla b'amud eish la'ir lehem lelechet yomam v'layla. So over here we have our Amud Anan. I'm sure we've had wars by that name recently, Amud Anan. But it shifted to Hashem holech lefneihem. So here's God, the protector, taking care of them. It's God who goes in front of them, and we're told with this Amud Anan. So now, when a moment ago I mentioned Sukkot, I hope some of you know that the Sukkot is connected to the Ananei HaKavod. And look what we just now noticed on the next pasuk. We noticed over here that there's a protective Anan right over here. So I hope now you realize that my what looked like an overreach, and asking this question, well, why are we skipping Shavuot and why are we skipping Har Sinai? Why are we going straight over here to Sukkot? Maybe it was a little bit of a stronger question than you realize. By the way, let's now note something else. Had they gone Derech Eretz Plishtim, what would they have avoided geographically? Sinai. If you go Derech Eretz Plishtim, then you don't end up going where Sinai is. So when I noted before that we have this really interesting conversation, maybe I didn't note it strong enough, let me note it stronger. We have this really interesting combination between geography, right, going forward, what's behind us, and the calendar, chronology. It's the geography and the chronology, it's the calendar, and there's this overlap of issues. I know, and I said before that afterwards you're going to say, yeah, I knew all of this, so maybe you didn't know all of this. Okay, maybe I overspoke a little bit, but then again, I may be guilty of what rabbis do all the time, and that's making really simple things sound overcomplicated. But I'm not. But I'm not. I'm not. I just pointed out, again, organic, it's the text. You should not have missed any of the things that I just pointed out. Again, admittedly, the Sukkot thing sounds like an overreach till you get to the next pasuk, and that causes you to pause. The shift over here between the Elokim used multiple times, and then we switch to Hashem. And now there's another point that I didn't make clear enough. And this is one of the things that we have a hard time reading properly, because there is some tension, a potential contradiction, and what we do when there are potential contradictions is we tend to resolve them, and once we resolve them, we make believe that there was never any contradiction, because no, it's resolved. Over here, as presented right now, at this point, when they leave Egypt, we're told about the protective clouds, and if I talked about let's say, geography, I also want to talk about the direction. Again, there's a north, south, east, and west, and we can more or less figure out which way they're traveling. I'll say more or less. Where exactly is the cloud positioned? Now, all of you are going to say, till you look inside, so what are you talking about? The cloud is all over, because it's a protective cloud. So if it's a protective cloud, it's above, it's in front, it's right, it's going to be on all sides, because that's what a protective cloud does. And then I ask you again to read the pasuk and see what it says. V'Hashem holech lifnehem. What does lifnehem mean? In front. Which means, like, it sounds very much, even though lo nacham Elokim derech eretz plishtim. So what's going to happen if they don't go the quicker way, where they're able to escape quicker, and they go the other way? Where I think some of you realize that sooner rather than later they're going to be trapped, and there's going to be no way out, because they're going to have water on various sides, and then they're going to have the Egyptians coming at the other side. So they're going to kind of be stuck, what it sounds like, by a peninsula, and that's it. There's no way out for them, and that is, by the way, what Elokim just now did. Because had they gone the other way around, then they would have been able to continue going up the coast. And then I always imagine they go up the coast, maybe, again, there's no desalination plants, but you may be able to access fish and other things along the way. If you're going up the Mediterranean coast, there's some nice beaches, nice fishing, and not only that, you probably have all kinds of water sources that run off, because all the water runs off to the ocean, yes?
It's good to orgasm, right?
No, at that point, it doesn't make a difference. So again, to have gone up the coast, it's interesting because, Elokim, no, but now I have a problem because I'm going in a way which right. I'm just saying to think about the geography again, because the geography is connected to the calendar, and it is connected again. It's the chronology and the geography, and it's the holidays as well. So actually, if you think about their need for protection in the desert. Again, if you think about the need for protection in the desert, the need is going to be heightened when they end up making this, I'm not going to call it a wrong turn, but kind of God is leading them in this direction. But if it led in this direction as opposed to going the other direction, now they're going to end up needing that kind of protection, which is not necessarily helping them in the back, and it's only helping them in the front. Do you realize now what I'm trying to say? Is that, oh, no, excellent. What? Very good. If they go up the coast, then they don't necessarily need the divine protection. You also don't need anyone to tell you exactly which way to travel. You know why? You go up the coast. This should not be terribly complicated. You just go up the coast, and you just keep going up. You see the big buildings of Tel Aviv. Okay, now you know. Now you know you went a little far. You hang a right turn at some point. No, but you go up the coast. That seems to be the solution. You don't need anyone to guide you, and you don't need. Again, I just want you to think this through a little bit more. Maybe we have not thought about this enough. Where is the divine protection in terms of the Ananei Kavod? It sounds very much like it's Lifneihem. It's in front of them. So now, if you're heading off instead towards your peninsula, where you're going to be surrounded by water and there's no way out, so now you have a problem, and now you're going to need some kind of divine intervention to help you. On top of all this, if I now go back, and I told you, I'm skipping Shavuot, connected to Sinai. Even though I'm on the way to Sinai, I'm just bumping into Sukkot first. I'll tell you what occurs to me, because I've already lost you all, so it's okay. Maybe I'll get you on the way back. I don't know. Do you remember the famous question of the Torah? By the way, you only say things like that. I'm going to say it again. I say simple things, complicated way, to make everyone feel inadequate, and then they think that they need me, right? That's essentially right. Do you remember the famous question of the Torah? The famous question of the Torah is in the beginning of the laws of Sukkot. He says, why is Sukkot in the fall and not in the spring? Now, just to pause there, I mean, it's a great question. His answer is the one which I don't like as much, and therefore I kind of don't take this question all that seriously, but it really is a good question. His answer is because it's too nice to sit in the sukkah in the springtime, but in the fall it's cold and it's rainy and so on, so therefore you're doing it as a mitzvah, not just because it's a nice thing to do. So it was very clear to me that the Torah never lived in Israel. Because Sukkot's a really nice time of year. Yeah, we have the occasional rain, but you can also have that in the spring. It's a really nice time of year, and it's very, very different sitting in the sukkah in Israel versus in Brooklyn. In Brooklyn, we're with our coats on. I can't even imagine what Chicago must have been like. Probably had to get a snow plow on top of the sukkah, and we had heat on inside it, and it was not necessarily as nice. And the Torah is saying, yes, correct. But in the Middle East, Sukkot is probably a really nice time of year. So what can I say? That's why I never really connected with his answer. But his question is much better than, that's what I was thinking this week. His question really is very good, because immediately after leaving Egypt is when we find the Anan. The Anan's right there protecting them, which means, so when should we celebrate Sukkot? If somebody would have told me, I don't know anything, let's say somebody would have said to me that Chol Hamoed Pesach is when we should be sitting in a sukkah, right? Because we haven't gotten to the splitting of the sea yet. I would have said, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Again, just imagine somebody who doesn't know very much, who's saying, oh, the sukkah is for the Nanei Kavod, so this is where it comes in. So this is it's part of that story. It's part of the redemption story. It's part of leaving Egypt. So that's actually, that Sukkot should be in the spring is actually a much better point when we're reading Parshat Beshalach. Later on, if we're going to read, in the various holiday sections, it doesn't make a difference later on Shemot and Mishpatim, where it's going to be an Emor or so on, then you're going to say, oh no, that's not really what Dvarim, that's not as good of a question, but it is a pretty good question why God put it in the particular place. Again, if you're going to look at the holidays in their other hat, and that's the agricultural hat, so then things are completely different, but that, I think, is actually a part of the issue. So, where have I lost you now? Well, I lost you because I made believe we're going up the coast, and we ended up going the other way. If we go up the coast, that's Midat Hadin, which is telling us not to go that way. And now we're going the other way, but Midat HaRachamim is not going to be on top of us and protecting us as we go in a way in which we need protection. So that was the point where I lost you all before. Right? On that point. Because now, going this way, they're going to need protection. But the protection, what do they need protection of? They need protection, perhaps, I said perhaps, of what's behind them. That sounds like it makes a great deal of sense, because who's behind them? We're going to learn very soon that Egypt's coming behind them. But where's the protection? The protection is in front of them. Well, we all know the story, and that is that we're going to have to need the sea to be split, and that's going to be this magical stuff going off in front of us. But it's interesting how there's the lack of attention to what's going on in back of us. Was all that clear now? Right? So you realize what I then did is I took the Elokim versus Hashem, I took the Ananei Kavod, I tried to notice where they are, again, just in terms of the formation. We then planted all of this on top of our issues with geography, and then geography in terms of security, and security in terms of the protected clouds, and those were all the moving parts till this point. Good? See, that was easy. I told you, you're going to say, yeah, I knew all that. Yes? Yes. In Pasuk Kaf Aleph again, Vashem holech lefnehem yomam ba'amud anan l'nochotam haderech. In order to, the concern is where they're going. It's future oriented. It's future both in terms of chronology and in terms of geography. It's future oriented. V'layla ba'amud eish lahir lahem lelechet yom v'layla. And then they have lights up the night in order to help them. Lo yimish amud anan yom v'amud eish layla lifnei ha'am. And again, the lifnei is interesting. Moving on now to the next parak. Source number 2. V'diber Hashem Moshe Lemor. So now we're continuing now, even though the introduction was all about Elokim, so now we realize we moved right back to Hashem. And again, now we're getting to this place, we're going to have some excitement, there's some theological issues going on. By the way, probably just what they don't want to hear. Egypt is going to chase after you. And there's an objective here that they will get to know, we will meet, but they will get to know God. But Yugad l'melech Mitzrayim ki barach ha'am, and they're told that the people have ran away, and Paro now has remorse. He can't understand what they did. and his resolve is strengthened in Pasuk Chet, V'yichazek Hashem et Lev Paro. And again, you realize that we went right back to Shem Hashem, right back to Yud Kei Vav Kei, which was there throughout the Exodus story. V'yidochach v'rei b'nei Israel, they give chase, v'yirdefu, they catch up, and so on. Pasuk Yud, Uparu hikriv, Paro is getting close, v'yisu b'nei Zot nehem, and they look. They lift up their eyes and they see. B'nei Mitzrayim nosei achareihem. So obviously that's going to be frightening. They see Egypt is coming. Vayiru ma'od, and they're quite frightened. Vayitzaku b'nei Yisrael el Hashem, and they scream out to God. Okay? And by the way, that part sounds very good, that they scream out to God. But that's what they say to God. Pasuk Yud Aleph, Vayomru o Moshe, but to Moshe they say, Hambli ein kvarim b'Mitzrayim? Are there no graves in Egypt? Lakach tanu lamut b'midbar. So we'll just note this because this is the kind of thing that they're so used to. If I would have cut out that little phrase, are there no graves in Egypt? I say, when does that come up? You'd probably be scratching your head. Well, it could be in Shemot, it could be in Bamidbar, it could also be later on in Bamidbar, it could be another place in Bamidbar. It could also have been in Devarim as a retrospective of what was in Bamidbar. So that kind of phrase comes up lots and lots of times. But I'll note, there is something over here, which again, I want to make sure we focus on. That's when they turn around and look backward. On the other hand, when you turn around and look backwards, that's exactly where they're vulnerable, because the protection is in front, but they turn around, Egypt is coming. So again, what do you want from them? Already in Egypt we said this. So this, just like Paro has remorse for having let them go, we see now that OUisrael has remorse for having left. To God there was this scream, which we don't hear what the words were, if there were in fact words. And they said, Chadal mimenu v'navdat et Mitzrayim. We would be better off to be slaves. Ki tov lanu avodat Mitzrayim mimotenu b'midbar. Slavery in Egypt is preferable than death in the desert. Vayomer Moshe ela'am al tira'u, and Moshe tells them, don't be afraid. Hityatzvu u'r'u et Yeshuat Hashem asher yaseh lachem hayom, ki asher ra'item et Mitzrayim hayom lo tosifu l'rotam ad od olam. That l'rotam od ad olam. That as you see them now, you will never see them again. Now, what's interesting, is that a narrative or is that an instruction? Is this part of this idea that you should never go back to Egypt? And by the way, it is discussed within the halachic basis as well. And that's it. Egypt is part of the past. So let me already introduce another point, which is going to be a little part of a tension that I don't want you to misunderstand. There's a mitzvah once a year for us to relive the Exodus, and that's obviously on the Seder night. There's also a mitzvah on a daily basis to remember leaving Egypt every day of our lives. Neither of those commandments require us to have remorse and to say, we wish we never left and we wish we were slaves, rather than live independent lives. Which means what they're articulating now, nobody tell me, but it's a mitzvah to remember that you left Egypt. This is not the mitzvah. This is remorse that they ever left. This is remorse, this is a lack of belief that there was God involved in history who ultimately has taken them out, and they're part of some kind of incredible, dramatic, cosmic event whereby God re-enters into history, and part of it is about God. It's not all about them, and that's also that they need to pay attention to. But this is not the mitzvah. This is quite the opposite. This is, if anything, this is a rejection of that narrative. So I don't want there to be confusion, because when I'm saying now, don't turn back, and I'll get ahead of myself now. Not every single sin, a good deal of the sins that take place, a very good deal of the sins that take place in the desert moving forward will all be because they turn around and look back. It's all about this regret of having left, and things are better there, and the food is better there, and everything is better there, and it's this nostalgia for either something real or imagined, but it's always about looking back. And over here, again, now you go back and think about the divine protections moving forward. It's like back is not even an issue. Back is not your problem. Don't look back. This is not what the story is. This story is about going forward, and I got you. By the way, that's really important, and I got you. How can we trust God? What do you mean how to trust God? I mean, we've just now had a whole bunch of makot, but this is all just keep keep your eye forward, and that is not your problem. Moshe just now said, what you've seen in Egypt, you're not going to see again. And I wonder how much this is a turn of phrase, and how much, this actually may be connected to something else. Let me just throw something out at you. There's another part of the Torah which has a narrative which is remarkably similar to Yetziat Mitzrayim, which if you've seen it, you can't unsee it. If you haven't seen it, then you say, oh, that's interesting. It's about a city which is rocked with plagues, biblical events take place. There is then a small group of an Abrahamic family who end up being taken out. And by the way, they're taken out not due to their own merits, rather to the merit of Avram Avinu. And then along the way, as they're being taken out, what are they told? Don't look back. Don't look back. Right? And just in case you want a little bit of icing on the cake, they actually eat matzah. They eat matzah that day. So when I say, well, there's a story over there which actually may be somewhat of a precursor, and there actually may be even a little bit stronger than this. I wrote an essay about this, I don't know how many years ago. I do know I published it in my second book. And I was just thinking about this morning as I was enjoying the traffic with all my fellow Jerusalemites, or people laying siege to the city. There was a Breslov guy in front of me who was dancing in the car. He wasn't looking forward. I don't know what he was doing, but he was happy. So he was happy, I was happy. Except when someone tried to get in front of him, then he sped up. So I'm just like, oh no. So what I was thinking is that right when they get to the door, they get hit with blinding light. So I always felt, oh, that's kind of like Makat Choshech, because they get blinded, but they get blinded by the light. Who actually wrote that? Blinded by the light? Okay. What? No. Okay, you guys got homework to do. So I didn't put in the sources. So they get blinded by the light, but there's actually a blinding by light over here that takes place now. But hold on to a second. I just got a little bit ahead of myself, and let's continue over here in source number 2. I mean, they're chasing and they're scared, and then Moshe says, "As you saw them today, you're not going to see them again. Again, Hashem yilachem lachem, v'atem tacharishun. God's going to fight. Atem tishtok. Be quiet." I know. You knew that I knew that it was Springsteen. But it was made famous by someone else. But it was, of course, it's Springsteen. So, yeah, Springsteen. I hope now you feel inadequate. God is going to fight. And let's just continue a little bit more here. Right. But Yomer Shemo Shemat Staklei Daber El Bnei Yisrael V'Yiso. Speak to them and let's go forward. Again, it's what's in back of you is not your problem, which is really interesting because it isn't the divine protection in front of them. So I'm just saying is that I can understand why they're frightened, because they have something guiding them, telling them where to go. But on the other hand, they're vulnerable from the back. Continue, and God says, go, the sea is going to split, and so on. Here's the one time it switches back to Elokim. Malach Elokim holech lefnei machane Yisrael. Malach Elokim holech lefnei machane Yisrael. Vayelech me'achareihem. So now, just in case you thought you understood everything, so we just now switched the name of God, and now it's Malach Elokim and not Hashem, and now instead of going, the one that was going in front, now is going in back. By the way, some of the commentaries say, of course it's going back. Why is it going in back? Why is it going in back? Because in front they know which way to go. Just follow the path. There's a path to follow. By the way, as I said before, had they gone up the coast, it would have been the same thing. It's only when you're traveling in a desert, they don't have the trees with the little the yellow right, the simanim on them and so on. This is not Shvil Yisrael, or you don't know which way you're supposed to be going. So Pasuk Yutet, Vayisa Malach Elokim Alech Lefnei Machne Yisrael, Vayelech Machareim, Vayisa Amud Anan Mipneihem, Vayamod Me'achareim. So do you realize you would not have paid any attention to that pasuk unless you had the whole introduction that I spent? Because now there's something really interesting which is taking place, but there's a shift from in front to in back, and the shift in the names of God being used, and essentially everything that I've noted till now has now become even more complex. And by the way, those of you, anybody know the secret about this verse? There's a secret. No. This verse and the following verse, Pasuk Yutet, Kaf and Kaf Aleph, all of them have precisely 72 letters, and there is a Rashi on the Gemara, it's not here, on the Pasuk, that tells us that if you know how to reassemble these letters, it's the secret name of God with 72 announcements. It's you take the first letter of the first verse, the last letter of the second verse, the first letter of the first, and there's 72 triplets which need to be arranged and put together, and this is the secret name of 72 letters. If you don't want to go and find the Rashi in the Gemara, you can just look at the Ibn Ezra in source 6, V'yisa malach Elokim, Ze yakodem daber b'nei Yisrael v'yisrael, v'hinei perish v'kar nasa, v'kfarit to Rabbi, Ze ubavor, does he get to this? Right. Ve'ubavur she'ela hagimel psukim dvukim ze im ze, ve'kol echad yesh lo 72 otiyot, ad kan matzati b'sfarim, katuv siman sod Hashem hamefurash. Which is also then really interesting, because if we're already noting some kind of divine involvement, how good will this be that immediately prior to the splitting of the sea, we have this manifestation of this Shem HaMufarash of 72 letters, which is right over here. And that's the tradition that was known in the Middle Ages, that this is, it's right over here, immediately prior to the splitting of the sea. And on top of all that, the beginning of it is Vayisa Malach Elokim Alech Lefnei Machne Yisrael, and then you have this shift from in front and in back. By the way, also notice that that's what happens to the letters. The ones in front go in the back, and the ones in the back in the front. If you understood this, then wonderful. If not, then obviously you're all too young for me to reveal to you any kinds of Kabbalistic secrets. Good? Good. And then there is the Anan, the Choshech, and it lit up the night. So here you have this blinding light taking place from the Anan. So I'm just going back again and saying, but that's what happened when Lot leaves as well. You have this blinding light. You also have another thing there, the blinding light. Sanverim, the lights come out and blind all the people outside the door. And who's there? There are these two Malachei Elokim which are there. And over here you have the Malach Hashem over here and here. So I'm just pointing out that there's a little bit more that one needs to pay attention to. V'lo karav zel zel layla, v'yet Moshe yado, alayam v'yolech Hashem, and so on. V'yibim b'shvat haboker, v'shkef Hashem machan Mitzrayim, ba'amud eish va'anan, v'yomit machan Mitzrayim. And again, God wages war. V'yinaer Hashem, Mitzrayim, mitoch hayam. That's kind of a line from James Bond. Egypt becomes shaken, not stirred. Very good. And v'yinaer Hashem et Mitzrayim, b'toch hayam. Vayosha Hashem, Vayomu Yisrael miyad Mitzrayim, and God saved them. And again, Vayar Yisrael Sherasa Hashem b'Mitzrayim, V'ur Amet Hashem, Vayiminu b'Hashem Moshe Avdo, and that kind of gets to the end of the section. But there is still some drama that we need to understand, and some of it is going to be theological, so let's try to unpack some of this. Now, when I first started thinking, again, I told you what I do every week. I do Shtayim Mikra Ve'echot Targum, and this year it's Targum Yonatan. I try to do that as early in the week as possible, note things that are interesting me, and names of God is something I always pay attention to, but it was also the things about where the clouds were, the front and the back, together with the shift. And so all of that, as I said, was initial thought. And then what I honed on was a well-known, but elusive teaching, where if I have Midat Hadin taking place over here, right, in the back, there's this Midat Hadin, and even the Malach Elokim over there. So we still have this Midat Hadin between Egypt and the Israelites. So there's Midat Hadin. So there is a rabbinic teaching, which I think that a lot of us know, and that is the complaint of the Malachim, who come back and say to God, these people are idolaters and these people are idolaters, which are essentially turning around and then asking, so what right are you saving them? Now, first of all, do any of us remember that? Yes? Yes. So if we remember that, at least what I want you to appreciate is why a midrash like that would be articulated here, which is you always have to ask yourself this question. That's one of the other things that I'm always looking for as I'm learning through the parsha, that if there is a midrash, what's the hook in the words? What's the problem in the text? What's it coming to solve? What is it addressing which is there? So over here to say that there's a midrash where the angels are saying, hold it, this isn't fair. Where did that come from? So now you start noticing that there's midat hadin over here, it's Elokim over here. There is this lack of protection in the back until there is, but there is this lack of protection in the back, so there is some kind of, and I called it before, there's some kind of drama which is taking place, so therefore for the midrash to come and then put words to this drama, which means essentially that there is an attack being waged against OUisrael, in terms of midat hadin, what right do you have for survival? Where does this come from? So I'll ask this again. Are any of us familiar with such a midrash where the angels are questioning? So if yes, good. Now, do anybody actually remember then the resolution of the midrash? Which means, hold it, we're here. So how did that happen? Like, how did all of this get resolved? So one of the things that I recalled was because that God essentially, you know what? Let's go back for a second. There is an interesting Maharal which points out a contradiction between the Ben Soromora versus when Yishmael is in trouble. And there it says, Bavor Husham, right? Hayeled, right? Bavor, what's the, you're a Balkore? But I think the Yeled Bavor Husham, like wherever he is right now. Which means God, there, Rashi notes that by Yishmael, who's going to end up being somewhat problematic throughout our history, it says that no, God judges him as he is right now, Basher Husham, as he is right now at this moment. On the other hand, when it comes to the Ben Soromora, what does it say? That you treat him based upon future considerations. So now make up your minds. When is it based on future considerations, and when is it based upon who he is now? So if you want a resolution to this, then you will look at the Gur Aryeh, the Maharal's interpretation on Rashi in both psukim, because he talks about this in both places, because that's a pretty good question. What are the rules involved in this? So if this was Rosh Hashanah, then maybe I would talk about this. If this was that parsha or that parsha, I would talk about it. You realize it's a good Dvar Torah, you can say it in any of those places, but the answer doesn't bother me right now. What is interesting over here is, when it comes to OUisrael, do I say, well, in the future, they're going to mess up again and again and again, so why save them now? Or do you say, no, in the future, they're going to do some really good things, or do I judge them based on, if I judge them based on right now, then what's the problem? Now, some of the commentaries that hopefully we're going to see are going to address that and try to solve that. And say, it's not our fault. It's not our fault. It's not our fault. We were placed in a very difficult situation, and try to exonerate us that way. We did not choose to be in Egypt. We did not choose to be in this dominant culture where all of this disbelief is all around, all this is permeated with Avodah Zarah, permeate with, this terrible belief system. So we were stuck. It's not our fault. Some of them are going to say, no, the other way around. It's because in the future, we're going to end up going to Har Sinai and saying Na'aseh v'nishma, and that's why we're saved. Now, either of these approaches are not really there in the sources that raise the problem. There is a fascinating midrash. Did I say that strong enough? There's a fascinating midrash which deserves a lot more attention, and that I'm going to give it, and that is in source number 3 in Shemot Rabbah. Here it's focusing on that matatzak alai, like, why are you yelling at me? And it says, Rabbi Chama, Rabbi Chinina, Perasha mishum aviv, explained from his father, Moshe l'roa shahaya mavir tzano b'nahar. It was like a shepherd who's bringing his flock through the river. You realize, of course, a flock through the river is not exactly the same as bringing OUisrael through the sea. Baz za'ev litgarot batzon, and a zev comes to attack the flock. Roa shahaya baki me'asa natal tayish gadol masoro. What does he do? He takes one, like, scapegoat, as it were, and gives it over. Here, b'teavon, enjoy. Omer yehi mitgashesh b'zeh ad shenavor et hanav v'achar kach ani meviu. And then I'm going to go back and save him even. Kach b'shash yotzi yisrael mitzrayim amad Samael. Samael is known as a terrible, destructive angel who's connected generally with Esav, but it is more like the Satan and so on. There are those who won't even pronounce the name. Likatreg otan, in order to create some kind of a kitrug against Am Yisrael, accusations. Amar lefnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ribono shel Olam, ad achshav hayu elu ovdim avodat kochavim, v'ata korei lam atayam. These people, till this moment, they're idolaters. Again, just put this together. Mem tet sharei tuma. They stay one more second, they're all going to disappear. So what does that mean? That means we're undeserving. That's what it means. So he comes and says, and it's interesting because understand the Satan as a prosecuting attorney. Where do you actually see that? There's a book in Tanakh that you see this. Those of you who don't remember, I spoke about it on Tisha B'Av. Which book in Tanakh is that? Eov. By the way, all the angels come together, right? They all come together and they all sit down with God, and then God says, "Oh, look how good my servant Eov is," and he says, "Oh, he's only good because you do good things to him. Don't do good things to him. Let's see how good he's going to be over there." So just keep that in mind for a second. So the Satan in Judaism is generally not, Satan at least, is not a demonic force as much as it is an annoying prosecuting attorney asking for justice. Why is that annoying? Because we don't want justice. We don't want midat hadin. What do we want? We want rachamim. And I hope you all now realize why this midrashic undertone is actually connected to the psukim that we've been looking at, yes? In terms of the shift of what has been taking place. Excellent. So it then goes on to say that the Satan comes, l'katregu. They're idolaters. And you're going to go do these miracles for them. That's completely unfair, undeserving. There's a better word for it. It's unjust. Masar Kadosh Baruch Hu, Masar lo Eov. He gives Eov, here, take him. Go and do to him what you want. Keep busy. You go and torture Eov a little bit, so he can. 1 second, this is really interesting, and I'm not going to give this the attention that it deserves. Although I stopped in the middle of the sentence, because when it continues, then it's a little bit better. Shaya miyo etze Paro, because he was one of Paro's advisors. Now, according to the Gemara that speaks about this, it says that Paro had 3 advisors. And essentially, Paro turns to them and says, well, what do we do about the Jewish problem? I need a final solution. And Bilam says, I have a wonderful idea, extermination. So that's Bilam. Balaam, swallow them up, that's Bilam. And then it says that there was someone else, on the other hand, Yitro was one, and Yitro says that's unethical. And you can't go and kill people without any kind of justification, and that's why Yitro then has to go and run away. And then he comes back, doubles back, and joins Am Yisrael. Then it says that there was a third one. The third advisor was Eov. And Eov was silent, because the silence of Eov. So Eov was Switzerland, and saying, we don't want to take sides in this. Well, of course, some of us may recognize that neutrality in the face of genocide is not necessarily neutrality. So therefore, Eov is punished for her silence because apparently he can't feel pain unless it's his own pain. So therefore, even though he's described as a very good man who doesn't do bad things, he also doesn't necessarily do good things. So therefore, when Midat Hadin or the Satan or Samael comes and attacks after the Jews, who, by the way, may have a very compromised past, and maybe we are not necessarily worthy of being saved, God says, listen, you want to go after somebody who's, deserves to go after, here, take Eov, and let's see, and then he goes, you're right, Eov, only, and then I'm saying we could just now move over back into the pshat of the book of Eov, which again is really interesting. So over here, it just just towards the end, it says, Masrani biyad satanu k'dei shaliyot zisur risha'im badin, l'cha hirta'oti biyado, hevi v'dei rishim hirteinu b'to sha'am, Hakadosh Baruch Moshe hari masati Iyov l'satan ma'idcha lasot d'Rabbi Niso. Don't worry, I've solved the theological problem. They're not going to attack you from the back. Midat Hadin has been neutralized right now. It's like we sent him off someplace else. You know where the book of Iyov takes place, of course, in Eretz Utz, in the land of Oz. So therefore, we sent the wicked witch off. I'm telling you that it's connected. We sent him off to the land of Oz, and the wicked witch is there going after Iyov, who's the wizard of Oz, and so on, and therefore OUisrael is essentially safe. And then and by the way, afterwards it says at some place in this match, and God says, after I get OUisrael through, then I'll go back and I'll bring Iyov back. I'll help him, get back on his feet afterwards. And that's then the resolution of Book of Iyov. So therefore, according to this, the whole Book of Iyov is essentially a distraction in order for God to use Midat Harachamim to save OUisrael, while Midat Hadin is busy attacking somebody else, who's somewhat deserving of it because of the neutrality. Interesting, right? Very interesting. Good. Source number 4, the Mechilta. You realize we are so not getting through the sources today, right? And you're thinking, so why was I up so late last night till I sent you the sources if we're not even going to use them in the end? I was up late going down from 9 pages or 11 pages at one point to 4 pages. That's why. I should have just gone down to like a half a page. Source number 4 is the Mechilta, who actually asked the question as well. Shomer v'natan Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai u'matzah malach Hashem, atamitza malach Hashem b'kol makom v'amar la malach Hashem, v'yam malach Hashem, and so it's always malach Hashem. Yisa malach Elokim. Why is it malach Elokim? Amar lo ein Elokim b'kol makom ela dayan magid hakatuv shaho Yisrael netunim badin b'to sha'a im linatzel im labeid im Mitzrayim. That there was tension. That's why at that moment it's Malach Elokim is right there standing, and again that it's going back to the Psukim, articulating our problem: is OUisrael deserving to be saved or not deserving to be saved? Rashi quotes that Mechilta more or less in source number 5, and he says, "Lavdil ben machane, vayelech machareim, lavdil ben machane mitzrayim ben machane Yisrael, lekabel chitzimu b'listerot shel mitzrayim." That's also in the Mechilta, to absorb all of the attacks. Mikol makom hu omer malach Hashem v'kan malach Elokim ein Elokim b'chol makom l'dayan v'lamet sheyisrael netunim bedin ba'oto sha'a im lenatzel im labeid Mitzrayim. So the tension, it's right there. So you really should have known. Ibn Ezra we already saw, and I think that we'll skip some of these other sources. Going back now to source number 9, which is Lot and that story, and looking back and don't look back, and she looks back and she had no right to look back, and the problem is when we look back, we realize that is exactly part of the issue. Let's see how much more we're skipping. The Yalkut, and the Yalkut is source 11, and this is the one that people generally quote in the connection with what I'd raised before, but realize something again, the Yalkut is relatively late. Again, it's not an early source. The Yalkut saw Rashi. Davar achva ma'im lehem choma, sheyarad Samael v'amar lefnei lefanav, Rimon shalom lov du Yisrael avodah zarah b'Mitzrayim v'ata oseh lem nisim. Miyad hashiv l'kodesh baruch hu shota shvolam v'chi l'da'atam avdua v'lo lo avdua ele mitoch shiabud mitoch tiruf da'at v'ata dan shogei k'mezid v'ones karatzon. The Jews did not do this of their own free volition. The Egyptians were the idolaters, and the Jews were enslaved in this place of idolatry, and therefore God is exonerating us of our guilt within Egypt and says you can't compare deliberate sins with sins which are based upon circumstance. The other source that speaks about this, which I think influences a lot of the later discussion, is source number 12, which is the Zohar. And again, it will ask the question, but give a different answer. It's right. It says Barahav. This is now instead of Samael, the angel of Esav. This is the angel of Egypt, and says Otomi Mitzrayim v'vikesh din mifnei Kadosh Baruch Hu. Again, wants justice. Amar lefanav Rimon Olam. Lama tarotze lasot din al Mitzrayim l'kro et hayam l'Yisrael. Rei kulam rishem lefnecha. They're all guilty. And it continues, and it says all the things that we're guilty of. And in the next paragraph, which again I just put together over here later on, And it was hard for God, there's 3 lines to the bottom. The only thing that ends up saving us at the end is that God made a promise to Avram. I made a promise, which means that this is not the beginning of the story. I told him, I'm going to take them down, they're going to be enslaved, I'm going to take them out. So what do you want from me? That's which, by the way, and Lot is also, as I said before, also saved because of Avraham. Again, just tightening up the parallel a little bit more. Now, this thing that I had in my mind about, but OUisrael is going to go to Sinai, you're going to find that in a number of later, I'll even say relatively late formulations, which kind of got me thinking, so where does that come from? Then it's not, I didn't find it in the Midrash. And I actually ended up giving up at some point after looking all week for it, and finally saying, hold it a second. I have a book that lists all kinds of fictitious things and tells you who quotes them and where they're first quoted. And in this, and I found in the book an entry on this, and it just quoted the ones that exist, that I all found already, but it didn't quote anything I wouldn't find. So I don't believe there's any old source, but I want to get to a couple of newer sources that should help us. In source 13, which is the very beginning of Moshe's being chosen, Moshe was a shepherd, which you notice has been in the background of some Midrashim, and he goes off, V'yavo el har Elokim Choreva, and he comes off to a place that we're later going to call Sinai. Har Elokim Choreva. V'yireh Malach Hashem. Hope you realize now why this is getting connected. It's Har Elokim and Malach Hashem. We have the different names right over here from the very beginning. He sees the tree, which is not being, or the bush, which is not being consumed, which is a manifestation of infinity. And Moshe says, I want to look at this incredible sight. He stops. And Moshe finally questions, after he's told about his mission, and skipping to Pasuk Yud Aleph, Vayom Moshe Elokim, Yanochi Kelech Paro, V'chi Yotzi B'nei Yisrael Mitzrayim. Who am I to get involved? Vayom Kiyeh Imach, I'll be with you. V'zeh Lecha Ha'ot, which by the way is also interesting. The same way that Amos, when they leave, God is with them, protecting the path and going forward, and so on. But this will be the sign, you will serve God on this mountain. So now the only question is, what does that mean? You will serve God on this mountain. And there are various possibilities. One possibility is that you will achieve the Torah at Har Sinai. Another possibility could be serve avoda, could be really a korban, that they're going to bring a korban when they get to Sinai as well. Rashi writes, "V'shesha'alta maschut yesh l'Yisrael she'etzu mitzrayim." Now you realize how somebody could have put this together with our question before. Our question before is, Midat Hadin asks, what right do they have? What right do they have? What schut do they have? And here, Rashi, not answering that question, but a much earlier question. But the earlier question, I hope you realize, is connected, because this is what actually dictates the geography. Why are we going to the desert? Because you have to come back to this mountain. Why do we have to come back? Because of God's answer. What's the answer? So Rashi understands that what is serving God of this mountain means, it means Matan Torah, which means, of course, that we have to travel this way. We can't go the other way. And by the way, is receiving the Torah, is that an act of rachamim or an act of din? So now you realize that's a little complicated. First of all, it's an act of din. The Serta Dibrot are actually introduced. Vaydeber Elokim, it's called V'me'eleh. It creates rules. It creates punishments. It creates laws. It creates limitations. But it also created for us the direction, and it created for us that even though it looked like we're dealing with our Ananei Kavod, but of course we have to go in this particular path, but it's as if I were standing next to God at Har Sinai, and I overhear Midat Hadin, or whatever you want to call it, saying, why are you saving them? And God will say, because I already made a date with them. We have a date. It's in the calendar. The one who actually says this a little bit stronger is the Sefer HaChinuch. It's in source number 15, and he's talking about the mitzvah of counting the Omer. Mishushay mitzvot tzad pshat. This is great because he says here is the pshat in the psukim about counting the omer. The shekol ikaran sheYisrael ino el Torah. The purpose of Jews is Torah. Umnei Torah nivru shamayim va'aretz, and that's why heaven and earth were created. U'kamo shekatuv, and he quotes a little bit. We're skipping. V'yei keres yibash nagalu v'yatzum mitzrayim, and that's the reason why we were redeemed and taken out of Egypt. Kidei shekablu haTorah b'Sinai v'kamu kamo Amar Hashem leMoshe v'zeh lecha od ki anochi shalchticha b'otziacha ta'am mitzrayim tavduna telokim harazeh. That the whole purpose of the Mitzrayim is to take them to this place. Upirish pasuk klomar utziacha od tam mitzrayim yelecha od shetavduna telokim har Sinai. Klomar shetikablu Torah sheya yikar gadol shebishvil zeh nigalim v'yotachlit hatovah shelahem. Vinyan gadol hu lahem yoter min ha'cherut me'avdut, and this is even greater than actually taking them out from slavery. U'lechein yaseh Hashem leMoshe ot seitam. Okay, I'm gonna. You really do have to read all this. We're not going to read the whole thing now. He goes on to say something which is not simple in the psukim, that he believes that they counted that year when they got out of Egypt. They were counting the days in order to get to Sinai. It's not simple, because the counting only comes in Emer when it's dealing with, when you come to the land of Israel, and it deals with agriculture. Nonetheless, that's the way that he is reading this right here. So the response then, that why is OUisrael being saved? And the answer is because, again, the simple thing to say is because they have to get to Sinai. The more complicated way is because God promised that they have to get to Sinai. God said, you're going to come to Sinai. Which means the arrival at Sinai is the conclusion of the story, and again, we're not quite there. What I do want to point out, because again, we have a lot of things to do in very limited time, that as we move further in the rest of this parsha, I already said it, every single time we mess up is because we're going to be looking backwards. Oh, but in Egypt we had food, in Egypt we had this, and every single time God's response is going to be about one of looking forward. What is notable, if you now consider this, is to deconstruct the Shira, the Az Yashir, verse by verse, and tell me how much of it deals with the past, how much of it deals with the present, and how much of it deals with the future. The answer is 0 past, a bit present, and a lot having to do with the future. Which means at that moment, they are living this, don't look back. And of course, the present is the Egyptians being drowned, but they're not dealing with the, meaning, couldn't you just as easily, you're saying, okay, let's all think together. We want to write some lyrics over here for a great song, right? Well, what point in history? Well, it's right after Egypt. Okay, let's talk about darkness. Darkness is great. Let's talk about frogs. And there were frogs. Again, you can put all kinds of lyrics having to do with the past, but not one word about that. Not one word about the past. It's all about the present moving towards the future. So that I think is striking, because that's what it's trying to take us to. What I'll add to this then is, one, the parsha ends up with the war against Amalek. And again, right before that, there's no water, going back to Egypt. There's no bread, going back to Egypt. And instead, no, we get bread min hashamayim. By the way, the bread from min hashamayim is called over here the Omer, which I hope you realize that there's at least some kind of irony in terms of this Sefer Chinuch. It's the Omer, that something is coming from heaven. Later, and the Omer itself, the Korban Omer, those of you who know, is from what? Is from barley, which has, if anything, to do with the korban which is brought by a sota, which now you have to really think about something. Well, the first time when they come out of Egypt, they're getting bread min hashamayim, and then afterwards when you go into the land of Israel, we're going to bring a korban omer. Does that reflect what happened when we came out, or what happened after Sinai when we messed up? Because you also have the whole sota process, right, when they drink and so on. So that becomes much more interesting. Moving forward then, at the end of the battle with Amalek, it talks about God's name being incomplete, the kisei being incomplete, the kes instead of kisei, because as long as there's Amalek in the world, we have this lack of completion. So let me just now point out one more thing. Sukkot is about the future. Pesach is about the past. Shavuot is about the present. And Sukkot is about the future. The Sukkot, you start reading especially the Haftorahs, which are there. In the future, all the nations are going to come, and there is this idea of people accepting God in the future, of Yom Hu Yashem Echad U'Shmo Echad, which means the completion of leaving Egypt is actually the holiday of Sukkot. That is the completion, when the entire world is going to know that there is one God. So I'm saying that doesn't all happen here the way that it's supposed to, but it's sitting over here. And by the way, you also have a very famous Sukkot David Right. Now, where does David come from? David comes from Ruth. Where does Ruth come from? Ruth comes from Moab. Where does Moab come from? We're right back to the story of Lot again in order to get to that very end of history and therefore that whole completion. So therefore, this other story that I said, oh, it's kind of a parallel. It seems to be, let's just put it like this. Leaving Egypt was partially successful and partially a failure. It's partially successful because God took us out and then took us to Sinai and then set us on our way. It's partially a failure because we were undeserving at that point. It would have been much better if we're deserving. First of all, the fact that we're undeserving, God saved us anyway, is just an unbelievable statement and one that we need to process and think about. And I've said this time and time again. That's really important. The Midat Hadin attacks us on this and then God protects us about it. What's the protection? The protection ultimately is, well, no, this is not a case of that you judge somebody, right? Bashar Husham, what they're doing in this moment, future considerations are important. And God essentially is saying, when it comes to OUisrael, there are so many future considerations because what they can do as a people is absolutely incredible, but it's off in the future. What we needed to do to find that, which in the imagination tells us, the Medrash already says that God answers us. No, the Medrash is, the Zohar at least. No, it's because of, it's fascinating. One Medrash said that God just has to distract. Okay, go after Eo. There is no answer. There is no answer right now, why is God saving us, other than God decides he wants to save us. And God doesn't have to justify it. You want Midat Hadin? Go after Eov. Okay, go as much Midat Hadin as you want, but OUisrael's different rules. Why? Because it is that protective cloud is in front of us, and God takes us where we need to go. That's a really important statement. So therefore, in a sense, I love the Midrash. God doesn't answer. The way that the Zohar puts it, well, like I have a promise going all the way back to Avram. So I made a promise. I'm taking them out. Oh, they sinned? That's not their fault. What do you want? You take them down to Egypt. What do you think is going to happen? They're going to end up doing the same things the Egyptians are doing. You want the other interpretation? You put together that Rashi, which is the same thing really as a Sefer Chinuch, even though he says it in a stronger way, is that look back at the Psukim. You can't question the beginning of Beshalach. Why is he taking them this way and not this way? Well, of course he has to take them that way. If you go up the coast, you don't end up by Sinai. We have an appointment. We have to get there. And therefore, why is he saving us? Because we have to get there. God made a promise. We have to get there. Do we mess up? Yes. Every time we mess up, what is part of the messing up is we're looking backwards. We're not supposed to look backwards. Don't look back. Where did we see that? Well, the truth is we should have learned our Bible stories and already have understood this. When Lot leaves stone, there's certain things you don't look back. You leave it. You don't want to take a little souvenir, some stone with you, right? You leave that. You leave that behind. That's not a part of where we're going. On the other hand, we remember leaving Egypt every day. We celebrate the leaving Egypt. We were slaves, but at that moment when we say, well, if only we were slaves again. No, if only we were slaves again. We want to be free people who have received a mandate from God at Sinai and leave our lives, if anything, as being servants to God, looking forward to the day that knowledge of God, which didn't spread throughout the universe the way it was supposed to when we left Egypt, but we want to get to this point that we can spread. That ends up becoming the completion of the story of leaving Egypt when we get to this point where knowledge of God becomes manifest throughout the entire world. So essentially, God has chosen us for a purpose. The purpose isn't complete yet, so we still got to work on that completion.